Welcome everyone to the Ginkgo Street webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about CiviVolunteer tips and tricks. We may have a few folks trickling in, so we're going to start with an introduction. My name is Roshani Kothari. I'm the Director of Strategy and Engagement at Ginkgo Street Labs, and I'm joined by Frank Gómez, who is a CiviCRM developer and principal at Ginkgo Street Labs. So just a little bit of information about Ginkgo Street. We focus on providing and helping nonprofits with CiviCRM maintenance and support. So we make it easy for groups to get started with CiviCRM. We also help them with upgrading. So a lot of groups are using older versions of CiviCRM, and we can help them to upgrade to 4.5 so they can take advantage of the latest features of CiviCRM. And we also help them with customization. So if there are tricky things that you would like to be able to do in CiviCRM that you're not able to do right out of the box, we can help you with that. So just a little bit of background about CiviCRM. A lot of folks on the webinar are already familiar with CiviCRM and using CiviCRM. And I think there was a few folks who are new to CiviCRM. So it was founded in 2004, and the founders had a lot of experience working with nonprofits and technology. It's grounded in open source, so there are no license costs or user fees with installing or downloading the software. This is definitely one of the biggest advantages of CiviCRM compared to a lot of the CRM tools out there that are proprietary. It's built for nonprofits, which is great. Some of the tools that you may be familiar with in the marketplace are built for for-profits and corporations. So because CiviCRM is built for nonprofits, it's really tailored to the processes of nonprofit organizations, from memberships to donations to events. And it's also being nurtured and constantly being improved by a community of developers and users. And that's one of the biggest benefits of using CiviCRM, because you can take advantage of the new developments that folks are doing around the world. So the folks who are already using CiviCRM probably already know that there's a lot you can do with it. Instead of using different tools for managing your events, another tool for managing your email list, you can do everything within an integrated platform. So you can manage memberships with CiviMember, volunteers with CiviVolunteer. We're going to be going into more details about that. And it really helps to give you a 360-degree view of how people are engaging with your organization. So are they giving you a donation? Are they participating in a campaign? And then which events have they been to? You can also segment your communication based on how people are engaging with you. So that's a great benefit of CiviCRM. So the topic for today is CiviVolunteer, and we wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit about volunteering and the importance of volunteering. We have some of these stats from the National and Community Service Corporation, which focuses on how important volunteering is in America. I know we have folks from around the world joining us today. So it varies from country to country, but in the U.S., over 62.6 million folks volunteered, and the estimated value is over 173 billion. So volunteers have a huge impact, and especially when it comes to nonprofit organizations, they contribute quite a bit in terms of their time and energy to making organizations succeed.
At that point, volunteer management also makes for better organizational management. There have been some studies, and unfortunately I don't have a slide or stats with me, but it's been fairly well documented that organizations that develop the infrastructure and the processes to manage volunteers are shown to be more effective at meeting their goals. And I think that has a lot to do with developing those processes and just learning how to manage people, because volunteers and staff are certainly different, but there's a lot of similarities. So if you can master managing your volunteers, you can really make your whole organization much more effective.
So kind of building upon what Frank just said, we found that, as you can see with this statistic, over 79.2% of volunteers also donate to organizations. So if you think about the ladder of engagement, so folks start out as volunteers, but then they end up as donors to your organization. In fact, they're more likely to give to your organization than non-volunteers. So twice as likely, actually, to donate to your organizations than non-volunteers. We want to look at this not only just from a technical perspective, but also look at it from an overall perspective of volunteer management. So what does it take to manage a volunteer program? So we have the 5 steps that were put together in the Points of Life training that you can actually take online. So you need to start with planning a volunteer program. Next is recruiting and placing volunteers, orienting and training volunteers and staff. Then you can move on to supervising and recognizing volunteer for the work that they've been doing. And finally, evaluating the volunteer program to see how it can be improved. So these are great 5 steps in terms of starting and evaluating a program. So we're going to work with these as we go through how CiviVolunteer kind of plays a role in these 5 steps. So let's start with planning a volunteer program. It's critical for an organization to really think about where does the volunteer program fit into their organization structure. So for example, during the holiday season, are you going to need more volunteers for a particular event that you are doing? Or do you need volunteers on an ongoing basis for specific departments? So it's really important to identify and figure out where the volunteer program is going to fit. The next is defining the activities the volunteers will be doing. Are they ongoing activities? For example, let's say if you have an intern for a few months, they're going to be helping you with your fundraising in your fundraising department, or is it going to be more of a discrete activity at a particular event? So it's really important and helpful to define the activities. Next is you need to really define the roles, and this kind of goes along with the activities. So come up with a job description for the volunteers. What are the qualifications that are required, the skills that they need, and also time commitment. This is really going to help you to, when you're recruiting volunteers, to find the right folks. Management, so you need to define a little bit about who will be managing, supervising, and training the volunteers. It might be that you have people from different departments that will be contributing to this management and the training process. And finally, looking at the schedule. So are there certain times of year that you're going to need volunteers more, and coming up with a yearly schedule for that.
And I think at this point we can go ahead and show some of how, oh, look at that, there are a bunch of questions in here. I was gonna mention a point of process. We're gonna periodically check the question queue here to see if folks have questions about anything. Unfortunately, while I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the questions. So in between slides, I'll pop over and see if there are any questions here. But yeah, let's take a look at how we would do some of those things in CiviVolunteer. Let's see what those questions are first. Call is locked, it says. Okay.
The conference is now unlocked.
Okay. Can folks hear now? Was everybody getting no audio? if there's been any change with your audio issues. Okay, can hear now. I can hear. Well, what do you, should we backtrack a little bit, or should we just keep moving forward and take a look at the software here? I'll wait for some answers to come in. Keep moving, I hear. Let's look at the software, I hear. All right. Okay. Right, so the first thing, let's see, where do I want to jump in here? In CiviVolunteer, volunteer projects are presently handled in the context of CiviCRM events. There's some folks who are very happy about that, and there's some folks who would like to see more use cases for CiviVolunteer. I think it's fairly flexible as is. There are definitely more use cases I'd like to see, but I think we can talk about some workarounds for using CiviCRM towards the end if it's not working for you the way it's designed. So I've set up a volunteer project here for this Rainforest Soccer Youth Tournament. And CiviVolunteer adds a few fields here to the event screen. So you can enable or disable volunteer management, and then you can also select a beneficiary who you would like to recognize for the volunteering. So this might work a couple different ways. You might have different chapters. You might have different chapters, and you need to track hours for them separately, or there might be other arrangements. But this is maybe not a soft credit in contribution speak. Okay, so let's talk about where we left off in the slideshow was about identifying volunteer needs. So let's start there, defining volunteer needs. So we have this soccer tournament and we need some people to staff it. So maybe we need 10 people to take folks' tickets or money at the door, and 7 a.m. is pretty early for a soccer game. So let's make that 10 a.m. and the shift is an hour long, and maybe we want, so none of these other roles really make sense for us. So let's go ahead and define some new roles. And there's a shortcut to that here. So we can add a new volunteer role here. And let's say we need referees for our soccer game. And you could put a description in here. CiviVolunteer isn't currently going to do anything with it, but we have heard from some folks who want descriptions for the volunteer roles. So that might be something we add in the future. And if we just refresh this here, we have our referee, and maybe we only have 2 games going on at a time. And I don't know how long a soccer game is. I'll just say 2 hours. So with that, I think let's jump back to the presentation. This is just a high level, and let's see if there are any questions. Yeah, there's some more questions here. Okay, how are volunteer roles different from Civi event roles? So they are totally unrelated. They are similar in that they're architecturally, the information is managed in the same way. If you've gotten under the hood of CiviCRM at all, you might have seen the concept of option groups. I can show you. Right, so you might have messed around with some of these before. If you have various gender options or you have other types of lists, and so both event types and volunteer role or roles for both volunteers and events are managed as option groups, but they're separate option groups. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the slideshow. Oh, one more question just came in. Call control mute attendees. I don't have a button for that, Roshani. But if folks could just mute their microphone, that might help with cutting down on some of that background noise. Mute line. Okay, I'm going to try that, and let me know if
you are now muted.
So I've done mute line. Can you still hear my voice? Perfect. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. Okay, so there's a follow-up question about why the roles are different. The reason is that they can be very different. What your volunteers, how they interact with your organization really has little to do with the event workflow, where you have participants and maybe speakers. There are a lot of cases where there will be some overlap, but I don't think it's appropriate to assume that there's always going to be a 100% overlap there. So I'll just jump back to the presentation here, and if there are more questions, we'll hop back to them when we come back after this next slide.
Thanks so much, Frank. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. And we will be sharing these slides with you also. If you all didn't hear the first part of the presentation, it's okay. You didn't miss too much. So I want to move on to recruiting and placing volunteers. So it's really helpful to define your audiences, what types of volunteers you're looking for, their interests, and figure out where are they hanging out so you can see how you can promote your volunteer positions. And then define and implement your marketing strategy so to make sure that you get the right people in terms of volunteers. Make it very easy for people to apply for the position and have a process in place so people are getting feedback in terms of that you've received their application and when you're going to be following up with them. And define how you're going to be selecting volunteers and a follow-up process as well.
Okay. So for managing the outreach of your events or your volunteer projects, I want to stress that CiviVolunteer isn't the answer to everything, or rather that don't forget about the great functionality that CiviCRM already has. For folks who aren't familiar with it, Always happens in a demo. No, I haven't configured my default mailbox. For folks who aren't familiar with it, CiviCRM has a great mass email tool, and you can use that to segment your list based on activities that people have performed in the past, or interests that they've expressed. And you can set up mail templates too. So if you have the same messages going out over and over again, you don't have to kind of type those up every time. And if you have a page on your website where you list your volunteer opportunities, that can be part of your message template. And so part of this process is knowing who your constituents are, what their interests are, and what they're good at. And so the demo that I'm showing you is actually running the pre-release version of CiviVolunteer 1.4. The stable version is 1.3. So I'm going to be showing you a few things that probably aren't in the version that you're running, but CiviVolunteer is built on all of the core technologies of CiviCRM. We tried not to invent anything new. We tried as much as possible to just repackage things to make them a little more useful. So CiviVolunteer 1.4 is going to ship with a form that you can use to collect general inquiries or general interest of people who aren't interested in, or maybe don't know about any of your particular opportunities, but who might want to sign up and tell you, I'm interested in and available to volunteer. And so what you're seeing here is just a basic CiviCRM profile. And if you haven't played around with profiles at all, you can find that under Administer, Customize Data and Screens, Profiles. And I'll just go ahead and pop that open, and we'll take a quick look at it. So CiviVolunteer creates a new reserve profile called Notify Me of Volunteer Opportunities. And the nice thing about using existing technologies within CiviCRM is that allows this to be extensible. So if you don't really care to have people's phone numbers, you can remove this field from your form. And the other thing that you're seeing that maybe you haven't seen before is this little slider widget. Some of the folks who are funding the next level of CiviVolunteer development are interested in measuring skill levels of people who are interested in participating with them. So the camera skill level is just an example field here. And you can see when I drag the slider, the level of interest or skill changes. And what this is doing is it's a fancy widget to facilitate a multi-select. So if I have a volunteer opportunity that is appropriate for, let's say, someone with apprentice levels, but I have volunteers who have expressed that they're masters at operating a camera, those masters are qualified to do the medium level tasks. And so by specifying master, they have also selected the lower levels, which will make it easy to identify them in a search. In addition to that, when you create a volunteer opportunity, a sign-up form for that opportunity is created. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh this here. And So you can see on this particular form, I chose not to use the widget. So these are the options that you saw rendered differently. But what we can do here is we can have people tell us what they want to volunteer for. So you can match them up to their particular interests. So I might want to be a referee, and if I have multiple referee shifts available, that would show up here. Or sometimes you just want people to sign up, and you don't really care about what they're doing, just that you have bodies, you have people. And so if I wanted to do that and I still wanted to assign roles on the back end, I could uncheck these public boxes here. And when I refresh this form, I'm no longer asking people the question. And then I can go ahead and fill this out. And that's not my phone number. And you get the nice little volunteer confirmation, and that moves us along to actually assigning the volunteers. And so I still have those roles that I set up, those shifts. I can still choose to make myself a referee or a ticket taker. So you have kind of a lot of flexibility here, and that might be useful if you have some roles that you want to have public and others that you don't. So maybe if you have like a DJ or something, or an MC, like a local celebrity, you might not want people offering to MC your event, but you might want to still manage schedules using the tool here. I've gone on a little bit longer than I meant to. Let me jump back to the presentation. First, let's see if there are any new questions here. Okay, there are a few questions. How are the qualifications defined, and what is the measurement range? So what I've done here is right, so this is also new in 1.4. There's a subtype now, a subcontact type of volunteer. And one of the main reasons we did that is you may want to collect skill levels for different people in your organization, but you probably don't want those fields showing up on every single contact in your database. And certainly not for organizations aren't going to have camera skill levels, and there's certain types of individuals who I'm just not interested in that information about them. So the volunteer subtype will help keep that separate. And you can turn the widget on and off using this checkbox that CiviVolunteer adds to the custom field UI. And there's a help box here, which is probably too small for folks to read, but it kind of explains what you're doing. And the multiple choice options here are totally up to you, what you want to call the different levels. What's important is that you order them in order from least to most. So your expert should be, and the value is actually irrelevant too, it's the order that matters. So the highest level of skills should be at the bottom, and the lowest level of skills should be at the top. What you call them is arbitrary. And again, that won't be available until CiviVolunteer 1.4 is released. So there's a question about how to view the public form. and that's pretty straightforward. If you go to the event links and hit event info, now in addition to the register now button, there is a volunteer now button, and that will take you to the public forum. Let me just clean up some of these tabs here. And is there a way to import an existing list into the volunteer list? Okay. So if I understand that question correctly, whoops, that's not the interface I want. The question is there a way to import people into this list here on the side, the available volunteers? We are looking at having a way to have arbitrary lists show up so that you don't have, so now in order to have someone show up in this list, you basically need to create an activity for them, which, just to get at the architecture of this a little bit more, when somebody, well, let's just look at my record. So when I filled out that form, I created a new activity for myself, and it's a volunteer type activity, and so the details show up here. So you could populate that list by creating the appropriate type of volunteer activity, but that's going to be either onerous or difficult. So at this point, there isn't a great way to do that. I think we may have a first pass at making that a little bit easier in the next release of Civi 1.4. I'm not sure it's going to be the end of this conversation, though. Oh, questions keep coming. Yes. Okay. So there's a question here about the volunteer permission. We didn't want to assume too much about who would be using CiviVolunteer or what their volunteer workflow is. And CiviCRM defines a whole bunch of permissions for just about everything you can think of. Where are the permissions? I think it's under people. Yeah. So this is Drupal. CiviVolunteer works in all of the CMSs that are supported by CiviCRM. We didn't want to write a tool that was specific to Drupal or specific to WordPress or Joomla. And so while there are some ways to do some things in the CMS, we really wanted something that would be useful to everyone. So in the permissions, there's a new permission, register to volunteer. And so you can set that however you like. If anonymous users should be able to volunteer, then you just need to check this box and save it. I'm not seeing a box on my screen, Roshani, sorry. How far out is release 1.4? I feel like we're getting really close. I'm not sure I'm ready to give a date because I'm sure we'll miss it. Let's say very close. I would like to have it released next month. Okay, I think I've talked too long here, so I'm going to hand it back over to Roshani.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of the next stage of the volunteer management process, once you have recruited the volunteers and they're ready to go, you need to figure out a plan for orientation and training. So determining who will be managing the volunteers, we mentioned that earlier, and defining the expectations, creating a volunteer handbook may be helpful in scheduling an orientation where you can onboard multiple volunteers at once. I mean, this is going to vary from organization to organization depending on what the volunteers are focusing on. But here are some tips in terms of some things you can include in the orientation process: defining expectations, creating a schedule, if there are specific skills that the volunteers need, providing that training, introducing them to the staff where it makes sense, and then going over the whole evaluation process so they know how their work will be evaluated over time. And definitely figuring out a way to show how valuable they are and the critical role that they're going to play in the organization. And finally, coming up with a more of an ongoing training plan to see once that they've been oriented and onboarded, if you're going to provide monthly trainings or brown bags for training and also sharing experiences among volunteers.
And I just wanted to add on to that. These are some of these processes can be handled right in CiviCRM. Civi Event is a great tool to use to manage these monthly trainings if that's the route that you go. And you can even get really meta, and if you have volunteers helping you organize your volunteer trainings, you can use Civi Event and CiviVolunteer together for that.
The next, once folks have been onboarded and oriented, then you have to figure out how are you going to track their time. How are the volunteers going to submit their time? And I think Frank is going to talk a little bit about tracking time. Also, are you going to schedule regular check-ins with the volunteers to see how things are going, what they need help with, and also follow-up trainings they need, and figuring out a way to recognize the best volunteers. So what are the criteria you'll use to pick the best volunteers? How are you going to recognize their contributions and the impact that they're having on your work?
Okay, so jumping back to the software here, let me just answer Ellen's question really quick. Our volunteers are different for most events, so I need a way to print the description of the role to be visible to the assigned volunteer. Is this possible? The answer is yes, that it's possible. It's not built into CiviVolunteer at present. It would not take a lot of code to make that happen, and if we'd be happy to help you with that, or if you have a developer in your team who can do that, a simple API call should make it pretty easy to display that on the page. We do like when people make contribution or improvements to CiviVolunteer for their own organizations, for those to come back into the project so that other people can benefit from them as well. So if anyone is using CiviVolunteer and has added more onto it, we'd really like to talk to you about how we can share that with other people and also take the maintenance burden off of you. Anytime you make a customization, you own it, unless you're sharing it with other people, in which case you have a community supporting that. Okay, so on to logging. We've talked a bit about the different kind of stages in volunteering here, and kind of the wrap up at the end of any particular volunteer event or project is logging people's time, or logging whether they showed up or not. So we have the status here. We can mark someone as canceled. We can mark them as a no-show. Right now I'm marked as scheduled because as available because I'm not assigned to any particular task. I'm still in that I'm flexible no man's land. But if someone is scheduled for a specific slot, they'll show up as scheduled. And now that I'm logging the hours, I want to go ahead and set the status to completed. And let's go back actually and make this a little bit better. Okay, so now I'm here, and we can add volunteers on the fly here. So let's just add a few more. No Smith. What database doesn't have a Smith in it? Okay. And let's maybe drag. Right. And you can see the counter at the bottom there telling you how many more people are needed to meet the needs for any particular need here. So now that this is full, it doesn't show red anymore. And when we go to log our hours, you'll see now that the status is scheduled and that the amount of time that the volunteer committed themselves to shows up here. I don't know if anyone's asking right now, but this question comes up every time. Duration is in minutes because that's how CiviCRM core tracks time. I would like to see an hours widget, but I don't want to diverge too much from what's happening in core. I think really the major holdup to having a little widget that does the math for you is translation and internationalization. Every culture that I'm familiar with uses hour, colon, minute, minute. But I understand that there are cultures that don't, and I don't think anyone has come up with a way yet to figure out the best way to represent that. Anyway, so now we can record how much time someone put in. So here's a nice feature. You can click this little icon here and pre-fill all the way down, and we can also show that someone, maybe Angelica here, didn't stay as long as she said we would, and Shad stayed for considerably longer. And you might also be noticing these star icons that aren't in your version of CiviVolunteer. And this is our kind of commendation feature. It's literally a way to give a gold star to a volunteer. And so this is a way to recognize volunteers, and you might use gold stars to kind of rank volunteers. So let's just say Shad stayed way longer than planned. And for now, this is a positive feedback only system. I could be convinced that there should be a way to kind of give folks a demerit, but no one.
Hello, can you all hear me? I think that we may have, okay, great. I'm glad you can hear me. Let me see if we can get Frank back in here. Just 1 second. Frank, if you want to say something, let's see if we can get you back here. Okay, let me go back and see if I can. Yeah, it looks like it is. The screen is frozen. I see Frank. I don't know if there's a way you can go ahead and log back in or call back in. And in the meantime, if you want to pull up the slides, I can continue with the slides. We have about 10 minutes left. So let me go ahead and, Frank, if you can go ahead and just pull up the slides. And then I can continue. Okay, so we're going to get back into the slides and try to wrap it up. And in the meantime, Frank is going to see if he can dial back in. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Frank, do you want to go ahead and pull up the slides?
Sound is working again.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, and I'm restarting the screen share.
Okay, great.
Okay, it tells me I'm sharing my screen again. So sorry, folks, about the technical difficulties here. I started, I don't know if that's snow or hail here in DC, and I wonder if that kind of put a blip in my internet connection. So I think there was a question. Can volunteers say I'm available every Tuesday evening, or does it have to be on an instance-by-instance basis? That's a feature we're going to also have a first pass at in CiviVolunteer 1.4. It's not ready for me to show you yet, but it's going to be, we didn't want to be trying to manage people's entire calendars or schedule, because I think that's a little overkill. So it's going to be more general availability, like you say, like Tuesday evenings or weekends only, rather than January 30th, because that would become, I think, unmanageable and not very useful. So it'll be more a guide of availability than a true representation. And I think there was another question. Is there any... Is there another way to track hour totals and levels of awards for different level of hours completed? I'm not sure I understand the question, but you could run your report for different volunteer roles, and you could give awards to the referee who has the most volunteer hours, or the ticket taker who has the most volunteer hours. And you can also add custom fields to the volunteer activities. So if it's not as important how much time they're volunteering, and this is kind of a terrible example, but if you have volunteers who are coming into your office to stuff envelopes for mailing, and you want to track how many envelopes each volunteer stuffed, and you probably don't want to do that because people will feel really manipulated, but say you did, you could add a custom field to the volunteer activity type, because it is leveraging existing CiviCRM functionality, and track that instead of hours. Okay, one more question, and then I think I'm going to jump back to this slide because we're getting close to the end of our allotment here. How can I send email to people on the volunteer list so they know they've been signed up, and then send them reminder emails? I think what you're going to want to do there is, again, leverage existing functionality within CiviCRM. And we're definitely open to talking about ways to make this better, but I didn't want to reinvent the wheel for functionality that already exists. So it may make sense to make it more accessible within the context of a volunteer project. But let's see. I'm looking for scheduled reminders, and I know I'm looking in the wrong place. Here we go. It's not just the internet that's slow, it's my brain. Scheduled reminders. So you can take an activity and you can select the volunteer type, and for people who are scheduled to volunteer, maybe you want to say 1 day before the activity time, send them a message. Be careful about which type of recipient you choose here. CiviVolunteer does activities kind of the opposite of how a lot of the activities are recorded in CiviCRM. So what makes sense to me is if someone is volunteering for an activity or some volunteer project, they're the assignee. most of the time, your constituents are the targets of an activity, and the assignee would be someone on your own team in your office. But in this case, they're kind of surrogate staff in a way. So you want to make sure you send it to the activity assignees. But there isn't a way to notify them like as you drag and drop them, and I think that's probably good because you might drag and drop a few times before you get it right, and you don't want to flood them with emails.
I think we can go ahead and skip it. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, no, I think we can go ahead and skip this. We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Let me go towards the last few slides.
Okay, if anyone has a few extra minutes after we officially wrap up and wants to ask some questions about evaluating programs, stick around and we'll answer those questions for you.
Great.
I think I'm going to say the same thing for this slide. There are some limitations to CiviVolunteer. A lot of folks don't like that it's event-based because they have more of like a recurring in-the-office volunteer setup. So hang out if you want to talk about these issues too. I'm sorry we went a little over. The technical difficulties surely didn't help with that. So what's coming up is the CiviVolunteer 1.4 release. Commendations, we gave you a quick overview of that. Skill specification, where you can define whichever skills you're interested in tracking, and your volunteers can tell you how good they think they are at them. We're also going to have a first pass at skill matching. I might be able to show you a partially working form of that if you want to hang out after we wrap up, so that you can assign people who have certain skills to certain roles. We've made some improvements to the volunteer sign-up form. You saw this kind of peripherally in CiviVolunteer 1.3 and earlier. There's one volunteer profile form that you can use across all of the different volunteer opportunities. So going forward, we actually allow you to select which profile you use. So if you have multiple kinds of volunteer events with very different participants or questions that you need answers to, you can customize the questions accordingly. And I already showed you the volunteer interest form, and that is the sort of thing that you can do yourself within CiviCRM, but it's nice for it to be kind of all bundled together. So next steps for us are we're doing a new round of development on CiviVolunteer as soon as we wrap up this one. And the really good news about that is that we have some matching funding. So we're looking for partners to kind of join up with us. We need to raise $15,000 in order to maximize the grant. But what's great about that is that your contributions or your dollar goes twice as far. So if there's a CiviVolunteer tweak that you've wanted, or even a CiviVolunteer major feature that's been on your radar, please talk to us about it. We are on a bit of a timeline to match this grant in time, so we're looking to have that all lined up by the end of March. And so there are some links here, which you probably can't click through the presentation here.
We're going to share the presentation with folks afterwards, so they'll be able to click on the link. Great.
So the roadmap shows you kind of where we're headed. It's still very open because the way open source works is whoever has the development power or the dollars to fund development power kind of dictates the direction that the project takes. And that's how we've gotten to where CiviVolunteer is so far. And the funders of our first major round of development were generous enough to share this with the community and make it open source. So we're hoping to kind of continue to build on that. So there's some more volunteer management resources here. These are more, well, Roshani could probably tell you a little bit more about these organizations, but if you're looking for help with the volunteer management process piece of volunteering management, of managing volunteers, there's some good resources here. If your processes are no good and you just don't have a good workflow, the software isn't going to solve that for you. The software just puts into code whatever your real-world practices are. So it's important to get those right before you start messing around with any software. Coming up in just a few months is CiviCon Denver. There's a little bit for everyone here. There's a discovery session for folks who are new to CiviVolunteer. There's developer training for folks who want to get under the hood and maybe change the way CiviCRM or CiviVolunteer work and contribute that back. User and administrators also. Not everyone is a coder, but there's still a lot that you can learn about the system. So this year, for the first time, the conference is going to be in Denver. And so last slide here is information for how you can connect with us after this webinar ends. And thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. And I'm just going to leave this up for a few seconds so folks can jot down information before I pop back over to my web browser so I can answer any questions that have come up. We are pretty much out of time now, but I don't have to go anywhere. So if you can hang out, put your questions in the box there, and we'll kind of roll back over what we didn't get to in the presentation. Thanks. Okay, so I'll just start answering questions here. Can volunteers log in to update their own hours, which can then be moderated by an administrator? The answer is no. We wanted to do that, but in the first major round of development, we didn't have the budget for it, and the client who was funding the work, they had very strict requirements on the time being accurate. And they didn't have the budget for like an approval workflow for the hours. So instead, what we settled on was having a way for an administrator to log hours. That is something that we get a lot of requests for, and something that I would love to see become part of this CiviVolunteer 2.0 fundraising effort. Awards tracking. Okay, so the question on awards tracking here, they want, for example, if someone volunteers 20 hours of volunteer time, can we incentivize volunteers by having like different levels that you reach? And is there a place to make note and track hourly totals and awards received? So there isn't anything too formal for that. There is a reporting engine which we didn't really look at, which we can look at if people want to see that. It's just a standard CiviCRM report, and you can just run the report monthly or run by different types. And one thing you could do maybe is kind of the low budget solution would be to run a report, and for everyone who has 20 hours this year, give them a tag of gold volunteer, and then you could run periodically send out, a free T-shirt or whatever incentives you have to offer to anyone who's tagged in that way. There is an interesting use case that I'd like to explore, and that's using volunteer credit almost like a currency. Some organizations, so we've worked with some public access community television stations, and a lot of them have a requirement that folks volunteer for other existing programs before they gain access to studio time of their own, or if they volunteer so much, they can trade in, so to speak, those hours for a discount on like a camera rental. Obviously, that history needs to be tracked non-destructively, so you don't want to say, Frank volunteered 20 hours and now we're going to take 10 of those hours away because he's getting a free camera rental. We still want to know that Frank volunteered 20 hours, so we want to track the currency or the rewards separately from the hours, but also have them be related. So that's an idea for something that we could do in the next phase, and I think there would be a few groups that might be interested in that. And anytime that we have organizations, with common goals, it's better for everyone because no individual organization has to shoulder the burden of the cost. Are there any more questions? Just give folks a few seconds to type up questions if they have them. In the meantime, feedback mechanisms for volunteer projects. So CiviVolunteer 1.4 will have a feedback mechanism in one direction where volunteer coordinators can feedback on an individual's performance by giving them a gold star, for example. We don't have anything in the opposite direction, but I would encourage you to look at existing features in CiviVolunteer for that. I'm sorry, in CiviCRM for that, because a CiviCRM survey might be a good way to collect some of that information, or if folks want that feedback but don't necessarily want it in their CRM, you could use Drupal web form or Gravity Forms in WordPress, or I think it's JForm in Joomla to collect that information. My bias is always towards keeping that sort of stuff in the CRM, so I would probably try to do that with Civi Survey. Let me put up that contact slide again. And in case that's small, I'll just read it for folks. You can find me on CiviCRM forums, IRC, or Skype at Ginkgo FJG. And Ginkgo is Ginkgo. And my email is frank@ginkgostreet.com. And Roshani's information is on here too. Her Twitter handle is just her first name, and you can reach her at her first name at ginkgostreet.com. That's Roshani. Okay, there's another question. We have a lot of small events, each needing 2 to 3 volunteers. Volunteers offer to cover multiple events, and the administrator needs to select which volunteers are accepted. Does the interface cover that? Right, so maybe what would work best for you is defining your needs with none of the public checkboxes checked, or maybe only some of them checked. So folks will just sign up to say, you know, I'm flexible, I can help, use me. And then in the assign volunteers interface here, so all of those people who sign up that way are going to show up on the left side here as available volunteers. The available volunteers, that's pretty much synonymous with the you know, I'm flexible. And so this way, the coordinator or the moderator has the ability to individually approve people for specific roles. So, you know, I might get 20 people to sign up, and I really, for example, in this event, I only need 12. So I can pick and choose who I want. Also, it's worth noticing this little menu on the side here. So I can move myself to a role, and if I have someone, it doesn't make sense for this particular example because both of these things are happening at the same time. But if I want to sign someone up for a couple of things, then I can copy Frank into a couple of places here, and I can also just delete someone from here. I think that answers your question. If it doesn't cover it, please follow up or clarify in the question box there. And if anyone else has a question, please go ahead. Looks like it mostly covers it, but not quite. Okay, I'm going to take Mila's question next. Is there detail under each volunteer profile for a place to designate certifications? Certifications or approval? Actually, let's finish Aiden's question here before we change topics. Sorry. Doesn't seem to show that volunteer offered for events 1 and 2 and volunteer offered for event 2 only. Okay, I think I understand. Right, so this interface is for one event at a time, or one volunteer opportunity at a time. What I could do with folks who who volunteered themselves but weren't used is when I log the hours here, I could mark them as not required, and that's a way to show that they volunteered, but we didn't have a need for them. But yes, this interface is presently designed to manage just one project at a time. If you have kind of a series of related projects, or events that are related, so you can see the name of this event is Youth Soccer Tournament. We can make that whatever we like. But a tournament maybe doesn't last just one day. The events might be over various days. And in some cases, I think it makes sense to, like if you have just regular office volunteers, you could just make the event be just a placeholder or like a container for your volunteer project. So you could call it office hours June 2014. And then when you define your needs, we could say, so for game 1, maybe we have a ticket taker, we have 10 ticket takers, but then the next day, we have another game at 10 a.m. With all the same details here. And of course, it wouldn't be a proper soccer match without referees. So we can do the same thing here. So that is maybe a workflow that will work for your organization. Okay, to answer the next question, is there detail under each volunteer profile for a place to designate certifications or designate approval of insurances when driving organization vehicles? So for that, I would recommend that you leverage the custom fields in CiviCRM. And that's not the screen I want. So in the example that I showed you, I have a custom field for camera skill level. And I could add, I don't know what kind of certifications. We'll just say driving certification. And we'll just make it free text since I don't really know anything about that. And we can just go ahead and save that. And if it's the sort of question that we want to ask people to supply an answer for themselves, then we can go ahead and add it to maybe the general inquiry form. So you would do that by managing profiles and adding the driving certification. And so when we put this form out for the public to tell us they want to volunteer with us, they can put in whatever makes sense in the driving certification field. And if it's a field that you're interested in keeping private, then you just don't have to put it on the public form. You can leave it in the custom field there and just manage it on the back end. Let me give another couple seconds for Mila to feedback on that and see if I answered your question. And if not, I think for anyone who's interested, I can get a little more technical and talk about the API for if you want to extend how CiviVolunteer is working now. I know at least one person is interested in that topic. Okay, maybe I will just go ahead and pull up what I was going to show you. So CiviVolunteer introduces some new APIs as well. And this is really probably only interesting to you if you have some coding ability or have someone on your team who does, and you need to make just the slightest change to how CiviVolunteer works, or maybe you want to create your own custom form, or maybe an interface that lists all of the volunteer opportunities that are available. So there are a few new APIs introduced here, and again, with the exception of volunteer need and volunteer project, all of this other stuff is core CiviCRM in terms of the data storage. So a volunteer assignment is just a specific type of activity, and a volunteer commendation is just a specific type of activity. So we could just get a list of all of our volunteer projects. And it looks like we have just one here. And so I will probably really bore people if I start explaining what all of this junk means, but basically, at a high level, this is volunteer project number 1. It's related to a CiviCRM event with an ID of 3, and the target contact, or the beneficiary that we specified, it was some legal group. Their ID is number 50, and yes, this volunteer project is active. And then we could do a couple more API lookups to get what the needs are. And there are some other functions that I think maybe are not exposed through the API, but there are some existing functions that you can use to get a lot more information out of here. And then you could use that to build a form or a listing of events. I think unless folks have more questions, we can wrap it up. We'll give you a few seconds to let me know what you're thinking. Thanks, Leo and Aiden, for attending and for your time and attention. Yeah, please do let me know if you have any more questions. Conversation can happen a lot faster if one person isn't typing, so we can move things along a little faster. We'll go ahead and get this this information up somewhere where folks can look at it, either the slides or the video or both. And if you have any more questions, feel free to tweet at me or just send me an email, and we can talk about ideas for either how to implement CiviCRM, CiviVolunteer for your organization, or how to make it more suitable for your organization if you're already using it, but it's only 75% of what you need. Thank you, everyone. This concludes our session. Bye.